Woke up to my mom yelling to my dad about how she hates me. I woke up to my mom screaming in the kitchen, not just any yelling, she was going off on my dad about me. I could hear bits and pieces through the wall. She's an ungrateful butch. All she does is sit on her ass and act like we owe her everything. It took me a second to realize she was talking about me. I just laid there staring at the ceiling trying to piece together what could have set her off this time. I mean, I knew she was pissed about me moving out in 2 days, but this was next level. Dad's voice was lower, harder to make out, but I caught him saying, "She's doing her best. She's just a kid." And that pissed her off even more. A kid? She's 18. If she's grown enough to leave, she's grown enough to stop acting like a spoiled brat. I stayed in bed longer than I should have. My room felt like the only safe place at that moment. I thought about crying, but then I remembered she'd probably hear and call me dramatic or manipulative. So I just stayed quiet, listening. Eventually, I had to get up. I couldn't avoid them forever. I walked out and there she was, standing in the kitchen, her hands on her hips, like she was waiting for me to show up. Dad was sitting at the table staring at his coffee like it held the answer to world peace. "You hear me?" she snapped the second she saw me. "You're not gonna last a week out there. You can barely take care of yourself now. Who's gonna pay for all your shit, huh?" I just stared at her. What the hell was I supposed to say? "I have a full-time job," I said finally, as calmly as I could manage. "Oh, big whoop," she shot back. "You think that's enough? Rent, groceries, bills? You'll be crawling back here in no time." "Maybe I will," I said, trying to hold it together. "But at least I'm trying," she scoffed. "Trying? You call this trying? You're leaving your family in the lurch. Who's gonna drive your brother and sister now? You think gas pays for itself? You've been freeloading off us for years, and now you're just gonna run off and leave us with all the work?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Freeloading?" I said louder than I meant to. "I've been driving them everywhere for years. I've been doing chores you never even asked my brother to do. I've been—" "Oh, here we go," she cut me off. "The martyr speech. Poor you. Always the victim, huh?" Dad finally spoke up. "That's enough," he said. But she ignored him. "No, it's not enough," she snapped. "She needs to hear this. She's got her head so far up her ass, she thinks the world owes her something." I couldn't stand there anymore. I turned around and walked out the front door, not even sure where I was going. I stayed on that curb for longer than I expected. A couple of neighbors passed by, giving me quick glances but not saying anything. I was hoping nobody would stop to ask if I was okay because, honestly, I didn't know what I'd say. At one point, my brother came out. He walked up to me with his usual lazy shuffle, a soccer ball in his hands. "Mom's pissed," he said like I didn't already know. "Yeah, no shit," I said, not even looking at him. He stood there for a second, bouncing the ball against his knee. "What did you do this time?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the problem. It doesn't matter what I do." He shrugged. "She'll get over it." "Yeah, sure," I said, finally looking at him. "And what happens when she starts taking it out on you?" "She won't," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I don't piss her off like you do." That stung more than I wanted to admit. I didn't say anything, just waved him off, and he went back inside. A few minutes later, my sister came out. She sat down next to me, cross-legged on the curb. "You okay?" she asked, like she actually cared. "Why do you think I'm out here?" I said. She nodded like that made sense. "Mom's being a bitch again, huh?" "Watch your mouth," I said automatically, even though I agreed with her. She laughed a little. "What? It's true." We sat there in silence for a while. Then she said, "You really leaving in 2 days?" "Yeah," I said. "I have to." "What about us?" she asked. "What about you?" I said. She didn't answer right away. "Who's gonna drive me to practice or pick me up from Sarah's house when Mom's too busy?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said, harsher than I meant to. "You're old enough to figure it out." She looked hurt, but I didn't apologize. I couldn't. I'd spent so many years being their personal taxi that I didn't have anything left to give. Eventually, she got up and went back inside, leaving me alone again. Dad came out a little while later holding a beer in one hand. He didn't sit down this time, just stood there looking at me. "You're not running away, are you?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm leaving. There's a difference." He nodded like he understood. "You sure this is what you want?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "It's what I need." He didn't argue with me. He just stood there for a moment sipping his beer. Then he said, "You know, when I was your age, I couldn't wait to get out of my parents' house, but it wasn't easy." "I'm not expecting it to be easy," I said. "Good," he said, "because it won't be. But you'll figure it out. You're smarter than you think." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't say anything. He finished his beer and went back inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A little while later, the neighbor's dog ran up to me, wagging its tail like we were old friends. I scratched its ears absent-mindedly, grateful for the distraction. By the time I finally got up and went back inside, the house felt different, quieter, but not in a good way. Mom wasn't in the kitchen anymore, and I didn't hear her yelling. My brother and sister were in the living room playing a video game like nothing had happened. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed staring at the half-packed boxes on the floor. 2 more days, I thought. Just 2 more days. After sitting in my room for what felt like forever, I finally stepped out. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't my mom sitting in the living room with my brother and sister talking like nothing had happened. Her tone was casual, even pleasant, but the second I walked into the room, her eyes darted to me. "And there she is," she said. "Come to join the family now?" I ignored her and went to grab a glass of water from the kitchen, but she wasn't done. "You know, you could at least act like you're grateful. Instead, you hide in your room like a coward." I froze by the sink. "What exactly am I supposed to be grateful for?" I asked, turning to face her. "Oh, I don't know," she said, crossing her arms. "Maybe the fact that we've done everything for you your whole life, and this is how you repay us?" "Everything for me?" I said louder than I meant to. "Are you serious right now? Don't you dare raise your voice at me," she snapped. "I'm not raising my voice," I said, trying to keep it together. "But let's get one thing straight. I've been doing more than my share around here for years. Driving them," I pointed at my brother and sister, "everywhere. Doing half the chores, paying for gas with my own money. What exactly am I taking from you?" "You live under our roof, don't you?" she said, standing up now. "You eat the food we buy, you use the electricity we pay for." "And I'm leaving in 2 days," I said, cutting her off, "so you can stop holding it over my head." "Don't act like you're doing us a favor," she said, stepping closer. "You're abandoning your family. That's what you're doing." "Abandoning?" I said, throwing my hands in the air. "I'm 18, I have a job. What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop being selfish," she shouted. "Selfish?" I said, laughing in disbelief. "You're calling me selfish? I've done more for this family than either of them." I pointed at my brother and sister again. "Don't bring them into this," she snapped. "Why not?" I said. "They get away with everything. He can't even clean his own room, and she never gets yelled at for anything." "That's enough," my dad said from the dining table. He wasn't yelling, but his tone was firm. "No, it's not enough," my mom said, turning to him. "She needs to hear this. She's been walking around acting like she's the victim when we're the ones who've bent over backward for her." "Stop saying that," I shouted. "You haven't bent over backward for anything. You've been making my life hell, and now you're mad because I don't want to take it anymore?" She looked stunned for a moment, like she couldn't believe I'd said that. Then she turned to my brother and sister. "Do you hear this? This is what ungrateful looks like." "Don't drag them into it," I said. "They need to know," she said. "They need to see what happens when you put yourself first and forget about the people who've been there for you." "Been there for me?" I said, almost laughing again. "You mean like the way you've been there for me every time you call me names? Every time you act like I'm a failure because I'm not living up to whatever insane expectations you have?" "Watch your mouth," she said, pointing at me. "No," I said. "I'm done watching my mouth. I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm leaving because I can't do this anymore. And if you can't handle that, that's on you, not me." She looked like she wanted to slap me, but instead she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was almost deafening. My brother and sister were staring at me, wide-eyed. Dad finally stood up, shaking his head. "That didn't need to happen," he said. "Yes, it did," I said. "It's been needing to happen for years." He didn't respond. Instead, he walked into the kitchen, grabbed another beer from the fridge, and went outside. My brother muttered something under his breath and went back to playing his video game while my sister just kept staring at me. "What?" I said to her. "Nothing," she said, getting up and walking out of the room. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what to do next. Then I went back to my room and shut the door, not wanting to deal with any of them anymore. After shutting my door, I tried to ignore the noise from the rest of the house. My brother's video game explosions, the sound of my sister stomping upstairs, and the faint clinking of beer bottles from outside where Dad was probably pacing around. It all felt distant, like it didn't even matter anymore. About an hour later, there was a knock on my door. Before I could even answer, it opened and my sister poked her head in. "Hey," she said. "What?" I asked. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I just wanted to say, I get why you're mad," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. I sighed. "You don't have to do this, okay? You don't need to take sides." "I'm not taking sides," she said quickly, "but I don't think it's fair how she talks to you. She never yells at me like that." "Yeah, I noticed," I said, leaning back against the wall. "She's just scared," my sister said. "I think she's worried you're gonna leave and never come back." "Maybe I won't," I said. She frowned but didn't argue. After a few minutes, she got up and left without saying anything else. I thought about trying to sleep, but the idea of lying there while everyone else was still moving around the house made me restless. I went to the kitchen to get some water, hoping I wouldn't run into anyone. Of course, Mom was standing by the counter pouring herself a glass of wine. She glanced at me but didn't say anything right away. I grabbed a glass and filled it from the tap, pretending she wasn't there. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't want you to leave like this." "Like what?" I said, turning to look at her. "You mean angry, hurt? You think I want to leave like this?" She sighed and set the wine bottle down. "You don't understand how hard it is to be a parent. Everything I do for you and your siblings." I couldn't help but laugh, which only made her glare at me. "Really? Calling me ungrateful and lazy is for me? Yelling at me every time something doesn't go your way is for me?" You're twisting my words, she said, shaking her head. No, I'm repeating them, I shot back. She opened her mouth like she was going to argue but stopped herself. Instead, she just grabbed her wine glass and walked out of the room. The rest of the night felt tense. Dad came back inside at some point and sat in his recliner, flipping through the TV channels like he was trying to find something that would make everything disappear. My brother and sister were upstairs, and Mom had retreated to her room. I stayed in the kitchen eating a sandwich over the sink because I didn't want to sit at the table where everything still felt too heavy. Later, I heard my brother and sister arguing in the hallway. It wasn't anything big, just the usual, you stole my charger kind of fight, but it got louder and louder until Dad finally yelled for them to knock it off. It was such a normal sound, but it felt wrong after everything that had happened earlier. At one point, I heard Mom on the phone in her room. She wasn't yelling, but I could tell from her tone that she was venting to whoever was on the other end. Probably one of her friends, telling them how terrible I was and how she didn't deserve to be treated this way. I went back to my room and sat on the floor, staring at the pile of boxes I still hadn't finished packing. It felt like the house was suffocating me, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Every time I tried to focus on what I needed to do, my mind kept going back to the fight in the living room. Her words kept replaying in my head, over and over. At some point, there was another knock at my door. This time it was Dad. He stepped inside looking tired and sat down on the edge of my bed without asking. Your mom's not good at handling things like this, he said. Yeah, I noticed, I said. He didn't laugh, just nodded. You're a good kid, she knows that. She just doesn't know how to say it. I don't think she does, I said. And honestly, I don't care anymore. You should care, he said. She's your mother. That doesn't mean I have to stay here and take it, I said. He didn't argue. Instead, he just sat there for a while like he was trying to think of what to say next. Finally, he stood up and said, just don't burn any bridges, okay? You never know when you'll need to come back. I didn't respond, and he left without waiting for me to say anything. The house was quiet after that, too quiet. I stayed up late finishing the rest of my packing just so I'd have something to do. By the time I finally went to bed, the sun was starting to rise. 2 days later, I packed up my stuff and left. Mom didn't even come out to say goodbye. Dad hugged me and slipped a 50 into my hand when she wasn't looking. Take care of yourself, he said. I will, I said. And just like that, I was gone. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.